Before she became known as Miss Unsinkable, Violet Constance Jessop had a humble beginning. Born on October 2, 1887 in Argentina, Violet was the eldest of 6 children to Irish immigrant parents. Her father worked as a sheep farmer, and life in the Argentinian countryside was far from glamorous. Violet was no stranger to survival, even from childhood. At a young age, she contracted tuberculosis, a disease that often meant a death sentence in the late 19th century. Defying the odds, she recovered completely. Her childhood brush with unaliving gave her a remarkable sense of fortitude. After her father passed away when she was 16, the Jessop family relocated to England, where Violet attended a convent school. Life in England was no easier for Violet, as she was thrust into the role of caretaker for her younger siblings, while her mother worked as a stewardess on ocean liners to support the family. This experience, coupled with a strong sense of responsibility, pushed Violet toward a similar career path. By the time she turned 21, she found herself applying for a job as a stewardess. It wasn't easy for Violet to land her first job. In fact, shipping lines at the time were known to favor younger, more glamorous applicants. Despite this, Violet's perseverance paid off, and she was soon hired by the Royal Mail Line. Her first assignment? Aboard the Orinoco, a modest ship compared to the behemoths she would later serve on. Though the work was physically demanding and often thankless, Violet found a sense of purpose in caring for the passengers. Little did she know, this modest beginning was just the start of a career that would be anything but ordinary. By 1910, Violet had gained enough experience to be recruited by the White Star Line, the prestigious company responsible for some of the most luxurious ocean liners of the era. And in 1911, she found herself on board the RMS Olympic, the largest ocean liner in the world at the time. What happened next would be the first of many brushes with death in Violet's life at sea. Violet Jessop's first encounter with disaster happened aboard the RMS Olympic, the pride of the White Star Line. At 882 feet long, this colossal ship was a marvel of early 20th century engineering. Launched in June 1911, it was billed as the epitome of luxury and safety, a ship designed to handle the unforgiving waters of the Atlantic. Violet, just 23 years old, had no idea that her time aboard the Olympic would mark the beginning of a string of near-fatal encounters at sea. On September 20th, 1911, just 3 months after the Olympic's maiden voyage, the ship was navigating through the Solent, a strait between the Isle of Wight and the British mainland. The waters were bustling with naval activity, and one of the ships in close proximity was the HMS Hawke, a British warship designed to ram and sink enemy vessels. The Olympic and the Hawke were on a collision course, though neither crew seemed to realize the danger until it was too late. The Olympic's sheer size and speed were too much for the smaller warship to avoid, and the two vessels crashed into each other with a deafening impact. The Olympic suffered significant damage, with a gaping hole torn into its starboard side, while the Hawke's bow was mangled beyond recognition. Miraculously, no lives were lost in the incident. Violet was shaken by the event, though she later recalled keeping her composure as she helped calm terrified passengers. This accident was a public relations nightmare for the White Star Line, but it also had deeper consequences. The Olympic had to return to Belfast for extensive repairs, delaying future voyages and costing the company millions in revenue. For Violet, the experience was her first close call, but it wouldn't deter her from continuing her career at sea. In fact, just a few months later, she would find herself aboard a ship even more infamous than the Olympic. April 10th, 1912. Violet Jessop, now a seasoned ocean liner stewardess, found herself aboard the RMS Titanic, the largest and most luxurious ship of its time. The Titanic was a marvel of engineering, an unsinkable ship that had captured the world's imagination. It was the second of the 3 Olympic-class liners, and Violet, who had previously served on the Olympic, was excited but also somewhat anxious about her assignment. The memory of the Olympic's near-disastrous collision was still fresh in her mind. But the Titanic? This ship was different, or so everyone thought. The White Star Line had promoted it as the pinnacle of safety, equipped with the latest technology and, of course, enough lifeboats. At least, that's what everyone assumed. On April 14th, just 4 days into the Titanic's maiden voyage, disaster struck. At 11:40 p.m., while sailing through the frigid North Atlantic, the ship collided with an iceberg. Violet was off duty at the time, resting in her cabin, when she felt a strange jolt. At first, no one seemed overly concerned. After all, the Titanic was unsinkable. But as the minutes passed, the gravity of the situation became clear. Water was flooding into the lower decks at an alarming rate. The ship's hull had been fatally compromised, and it was sinking fast. Panic quickly spread among the passengers and crew, but Violet, calm and composed, was instructed to assist with getting women and children into lifeboats. In one of the most heart-wrenching moments of her life, she helped usher people into the lifeboats, fully aware that there were not enough for everyone. She later recalled being handed a baby by one of the officers and told to look after the child as she boarded Lifeboat 16. As the Titanic's bow plunged beneath the freezing water, the ship's stern lifted high into the air before breaking apart and sinking to the depths of the Atlantic. The icy waters were filled with the desperate cries of those still clinging to the wreckage. Violet, huddled with others in the lifeboat, was terrified but remained composed. Hours later, as the RMS Carpathia arrived to rescue the survivors, Violet and the baby were brought aboard. Miraculously, both survived the night. Days later, when they reached New York, the baby was reunited with its mother, who snatched the child from Violet's arms without saying a word. The Titanic disaster claimed over 1,500 lives, making it one of the deadliest maritime tragedies in history. For Violet, the sinking was a haunting experience that left an indelible mark on her life. She had witnessed firsthand the fragility of human life in the face of nature's overwhelming power. But remarkably, just as she had after the Olympic incident, Violet would return to sea, undeterred by the tragedy. If surviving the Titanic wasn't enough, just 4 years later, Violet Jessop would face such a situation again, this time aboard the HMHS Britannic. The Britannic, the third and final ship in the Olympic class, had been transformed into a hospital ship during World War I. Violet volunteered to serve as a nurse, eager to help wounded soldiers. The Britannic, like its predecessors, was heralded as a marvel of engineering. It was larger and supposedly safer than the Titanic, equipped with additional lifeboats and structural modifications. Surely this ship wouldn't meet the same fate. On the morning of November 21st, 1916, the Britannic was sailing through the Aegean Sea, en route to pick up more injured soldiers. The sun was shining and the sea was calm. A seemingly peaceful day. At 8:12 a.m., a massive explosion rocked the ship. The Britannic had struck a German mine, and within minutes, it became clear that the damage was catastrophic. Water began pouring into the ship's hull at an alarming rate, much faster than anyone had anticipated. Violet, who was in the nurses' quarters at the time, immediately sprang into action. As the ship listed heavily to one side, she helped evacuate as many wounded as she could. The situation was dire. Despite the improvements made after the Titanic disaster, the Britannic was sinking faster than anyone had imagined. The order was given to abandon ship, and Violet once again found herself in a lifeboat, desperately rowing away from the sinking behemoth. But this time, disaster struck even as she tried to escape. The ship's massive propellers, still spinning beneath the surface, began pulling the lifeboats toward them. Violet's boat was no exception. Realizing the danger, she jumped into the water, narrowly avoiding being sucked into the propellers. In the chaos, she struck her head on the ship's keel, but managed to stay afloat until she was rescued by another lifeboat. It wasn't until years later that she learned the injury she sustained had caused a skull fracture, something she had lived with unknowingly for the rest of her life. The Britannic sank in just 55 minutes, claiming the lives of 30 people. For Violet, it was yet another narrow escape. She had now survived the sinking of all 3 Olympic-class ships, which earned her the nickname Miss Unsinkable. But even after these close brushes with death, Violet's love for the sea remained unshaken. Once again, she returned to her work as a stewardess, seemingly unfazed by the tragedies she had endured. After surviving not 1, not 2, but 3 shipwrecks, you might think Violet Jessop would have given up on life at sea, but Violet was nothing if not resilient. After the Britannic disaster, she continued working as a stewardess for the White Star Line and later for other shipping companies. It was as if the sea had a magnetic pull on her, despite all the dangers she had faced. In the years following the war, Violet continued her career aboard various ocean liners, traveling around the world. She worked well into her 60s, dedicating over 4 decades of her life to a profession she had grown to love, Even with its inherent risks, Violet eventually retired to a quiet life in Great Ashfield, Suffolk. She never married, though she reportedly received several proposals during her lifetime. Perhaps her solitary nature was shaped by the hardships she had endured, or maybe she simply found peace in the quiet countryside after so many years at sea. In 1934, long after the Titanic had slipped into legend, Violet received a strange phone call. The voice on the other end asked her if she had been the stewardess who saved a baby during the Titanic disaster. When she confirmed it, the caller revealed that they were that very child. The call, however, abruptly ended, leaving Violet to wonder if it had been a cruel prank or some strange twist of fate. Violet Jessop passed away on May 5th, 1971, at the age of 83. She had lived through some of the most terrifying and tragic maritime disasters in history, yet her spirit remained unbroken. Today, she is remembered as Miss Unsinkable, a woman whose life story is a testament to human endurance, courage, and an indomitable will to survive.